So dividing whole numbers by 10, 100 and 1000. We're going to start with 10, but before I go any further, just to make sure that you're aware, when you divide a number, you make it smaller. So it's being split into smaller parts. Sometimes it means you're taking a whole number like 25 and dividing it both by 5. Each group would then contain 5. You'd have 5 lots of 5. With some other numbers, like for example, if you were to take 2 and divide it by 4, you would end up with a half or 0.5 in each group. So you don't always end up with a whole number when you're dividing by 10, 100 or 1000, or when you're doing any kind of division. So we're going to start here with 3250. So that goes in here, 3250. And one of the things that I always do when I'm dividing by 10, 100 and 1000 is I always pop in my decimal point and a 0 after it, just for while I'm doing my workings out, and then I can take it away afterwards if I don't need it. Now, what I'm doing here by dividing by 10 is I'm making the number 3250 10 times smaller, so I'm effectively dividing it into 10 parts. So I know that if I was to take 10, the number 10, and divide it into 10 parts, I would end up with, so if I was to take this and divide it into 10 parts, I would end up with a 1. Equally, if I was to take 100 and divide it into 10 parts, I would actually end up with a 10. So you can see how with this number system we use called base 10, what we're actually doing when we're moving those digits from one place value column to another, we can do that when we're dividing by 10, 100 and 1000, because the system that we're working with works in tens. So for this number here, divided by 10, I'm going to move each digit one place value column to the right because I'm dividing by 10. I'm going to start with my 3000, so that's going to move to here. My 200 is going to move to here. My 5 is going to move to here, and my 0 would move to here. So we would end up with 325.0. Now, because it's 0.0 on the end, there's nothing else there. What we'd actually write as our total is 325. If we were to apply that same method to 456, I would first of all label, so we've got ones, tens and hundreds. I'm labelling it here rather than doing it on this place value chart at the bottom. And again, I'm dividing by 10. So let's start with my labels down here as well. So ones, tens, hundreds and tenths and hundredths. And I'm going to write my number, which is 456. Now, when I divide by 10, the digits are moving one decimal place value, one place value column, sorry, to the right. So let's do that here. So the 4 would move here, the 5 here, the 6 here. So you can see how we end up with, in a question like this, 45 point. All right, we'll make mistakes, 45.6. And then in the question 72 divided by 10, we would end up with 7.2. So each digit has moved one place value column to the right. So here we're dividing exactly the same numbers as before, but we're dividing them by 100. Now, as we've discussed, we know that when we divide, say, 10 by 10, we move one place value column to the right, because 10 divided by 10 actually gives us 1. And however, if we're divided by 100, if I was to take 100 and divide it by 100, for example, I would end up with 1. So when I divide by 100, I'm actually moving two place value columns. So there's 1 and then 2. So I'm going to apply that up here. So we've got 3,250. I'm dividing it by 100. I'm just going to put my decimal point in there so I know where it is. And each digit of the number is going to jump two place value columns to the right. So 1, 2, so my 3 would move here, 1, 2, 2 moves there, 1, 2, 5 moves there, and if I had the 0, 1, 2 would move there. But because I am putting that decimal point in and the zeros on the end is redundant, I don't need it to be there, so it's 32.5 that I end up with. Here, so 32.5. Okay, so I'm going to apply that same method up here to 456. So here I've got ones, tens and hundreds. So I'm going to label those as ones, tens and hundreds. And then I'm going to put in my tenths and my, another decimal point there, and my hundredths. So writing those numbers in underneath, we have currently got 456. Each digit is going to move two place value columns to the right. So 1, 2, so the 4 would go here, decimal point always remains in that same place. 1, 2 for the 5, and then 1, 2 for the 6. So you can see here we end up with 4.56. Now with a question like 72 divided by 100, sometimes you can get in a bit of a muddle with that one. So I'm actually going to model that one down here on the place value chart I've got at the bottom, because it's just a little bit easier to see what happens with those numbers and where the 0 comes from. So let's start with the number 72, and we're going to be dividing that by 100. So let's write that in. So very simply 72, decimal point there, just so we remember where it is so we don't lose it, and then we're going to divide that by 100. So each digit's going to move 2 place value columns to the right. So 1, 2, the 7 goes here, 1, 2, the 2 goes here. Now we wouldn't write nothing 0.72, we put a 0 in there to show that there's no ones, but we have 0.72 of one whole. So the total here would be 0.72. Right, so here we have the number 3,250, and what we're going to be doing now is dividing by 1,000. So previously we have been moving the place value column either once for tens or twice for hundreds. Here it's thousands. Look, we've got 3 zeros, we actually move 3 place value columns to the right as we divide. So let's put that decimal point in here and points in here and here. Let's write the number in, so 3,250. We know, don't we, that 10 times 10 times 10 is the same as 1,000. So if I'm dividing by 1,000, I would divide by 10, divide by 10, divide by 10 is the same thing, which is why we're moving those digits 3 place value columns to the right. So let's start here. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we end up with 3.25. If we were to apply the same method with the 1,000, we would end up with 0.456, and for 72 we would end up with 0.072.